The Jailbreakers, 3 desperate men whose plans are interrupted by 2 innocent people. Robert Hutton and Mary Castle, trapped in a web of terror that'll tear your nerves to shreds. The ringleader, determined to get away with a fortune they all came to hijack. The torpedo, cunningly conniving to satisfy his killer lust. The penitentiary Hercules, driven mad by desires too long denied. No man has ever faced such hopeless odds. No stolen fortune has brought more terrifying dangers.
We're not talking about actors. We mean a real monster.
I brought her back. She'll live and I'll get her another body.
I know they're going to catch me, but don't let anyone see me like that. Please, Doctor, help me!
Biologically speaking, it's of primary importance that man should want to mate. Hey, that
You don't get all your kicks from surfing, do you?
We want to be free to ride our machines without being hassled by the man. And we want to get loaded.
You think you're going to make a slave of the world? I'll see you in hell first!
The American International Podcast.
Are you ready?
Hi there, I'm Jeff Markin.
And I'm Cheryl Lightfoot.
And thanks for taking a break with the American International Podcast, where today we will be talking about The Jailbreakers from 1960.
The Jailbreakers was written, directed, and produced by Alexander Grasshoff for Alta Vista Productions and released by American International Pictures.
Appearing in The Jailbreakers are Robert Hutton as Tom, Mary Castle as June, Michael O'Connell as Lake, Gabe Delutri as Joe, Anton von Stralen as Stearn, Toby Hill as Karen, Carlos Chávez as Bushman, and Coleman Francis as the sheriff.
As the movie opens, we see a car waiting outside the state prison. The driver pulls forward as 3 jailbreakers drop outside the prison wall. Those 3 scramble into the car and it drives away. And then title, credits, Coleman Francis? The car is driving awfully fast on narrow roads. Inside the car, the 3 escapees change into street clothes / the hoodlum uniform of a suit and tie.
These 3 men are Lake, Stearn, and Joe. Together, we will refer to them as the Jailbreakers. The driver drops them off at a rendezvous point where they are to meet with Tom, who is Lake's stepson. Joe asks for and receives a gun, and they realize that Tom hasn't arrived yet. The driver tells the Jailbreakers that Tom is on his way before speeding off.
Lake, the older of the 3, looks askance as Joe plays with his weapon. Stearn crabs that their ride better show up, but it's not long before a car comes down the road and parks in a nearby driveway. It's in front of a fence. The kid that we've been promised gets out, but he's not alone. Who's he with? Asks Joe. Lake doesn't know. Lake goes over to the car to say hi to Tom. When he was in prison, he and Tom lost touch because Lake didn't want Tom to see him locked up. He asked Tom about his companion. She had gone off to see if she could find some coffee or breakfast or something at a nearby restaurant. But Tom calls her back to meet his old man.
Tom introduces his wife, June, and Lake says he has some friends he'd like Tom to meet as well. He calls them over and introduces Mr. Stearn and Joe Spender. Then Lake suggests he can talk better in the car, so Stearn and Joe take the back while Lake sits in the front with Tom and June.
No breakfast for June.
Lake asks if they can put the top up, but Tom says it was broken when he bought it.
I wonder why he wants the top up.
As they drive off, Tom asks why he wanted to meet at this particular restaurant, and why are they now headed to the mountains. Lake explains that now that he's out of prison, they're going to meet one of the men from the syndicate and maybe get some evidence to clear his name of that conspiracy charge so that he can practice law again. He tells June he was a big-time lawyer once upon a time, but June knows all about that. She's read the articles that Tom has kept about his stepfather. Tom says that was all before he tried a big case for that crime syndicate.
Tom thinks this is a fantastic idea, by which he means hard to believe. What if this guy wants to stop him from bringing the case out into the open again? Lake says he's been waiting for this day for 10 years, so if that's their plan, he needs to know about it now. Tom tells us that this plan came together late last night. Tom never knew Lake was due to be released today. Lake says, yeah, it sure was last minute, as Stearn rolls his eyes.
Then Lake immediately changes the subject. How long have Tom and June been married? Almost a year now, says June.
Any kids? Ha ha ha, not yet, chuckles June.
In the backseat, Stearn is getting a little antsy. Would you mind going a little faster? And I think they do. They seem to be driving a little faster through these mountainous roads. June notes that they picked a hot day for such a long drive. Tom says maybe some cool music will help, but Lake tells him not to turn on the radio. I wonder why he doesn't want the radio turned on. The car is going through a small town, and the sheriff eyes the out-of-towner suspiciously as they drive past him.
June wants to stop to grab a bite, but Lake says no. He even forbids her from stopping at a grocery store to get a candy bar. No stopping. This woman is going to be hangry soon. Tom does not see this suspicious behavior as the massive red flag it is, so he proceeds to the route.
Lake tells Tom that every moment counts and they've got to get there before he arrives. Well, why didn't you say so, says Tom. And after a short while, they pull up into a ghost town.
They make a squeaky stop at a ghost town.
The five exit the car and each have a look around.
Jew comments on the weirdness of this place and everybody silently strolls about. Then a snake slithers into view before hiding itself under some boards lying on the ground. Lake demands that Stearn hide the vehicle behind the old saloon.
Stearn asks Lake when he's going to tell Tom what's going on. I'll tell him, says Lake. Then Tom comes over and asks Lake where he's taking the car. Lake says he's just putting it off the road. Then Tom and June sit down on a bench outside the general store. This is going to be kind of their home base for the rest of the movie. June thinks it's odd how shocked they seem when Tom introduced her to them, and she wonders if they might be involved in something. Tom doesn't know. Lake has Stearn keeping a lookout on one end of town, and he asks Joe to keep a lookout on the other end of town. What for? Asks Joe. He's not coming from the mountains. No, but somebody else might, says Lake. We don't want to be seen by anyone. As Joe trudges off, Lake warns him to stay out of the buildings, unless he wants to be bitten by a rattlesnake. Lake goes over to join Tom and June. Tom asks who they're waiting for. Lake says a man named Bushman, but that's all he knows. Again, Lake is anxious to change the subject. He says they really caught him by surprise when they told him Tom was married. The possibility never dawned on him. Is he a good cook? Asked Lake. I don't know, are you? June asked Tom.
Lake tells Tom that he doesn't even know what Tom does for a living. June tells him that Tom is studying law, so that's something they have in common. Lake asks if Tom is doing okay financially, and Tom says yes, he's studying under the GI Bill. Lake thinks this is a very fine idea.
Then Lake tells Tom that if Bushman comes through, Tom won't have to worry about a thing. If he doesn't, then Lake will be digging ditches. He's been disbarred, you know.
June asks if he can't practice in another state, and Lane says he can't practice anywhere. Sucks to be you, says June, or at least that's what she's thinking, I think. Joe comes up and Lake demands to know what's the matter. Joe fesses up that he won't be stuck staring at an unused road all day. Lake tells him to take a walk with him.
As they walk off, June notes that she doesn't like the way that guy Joe looks at her, and neither does Tom. He thinks they're all acting strange. And did she notice the gun in Joe's back pocket? What's he doing with a gun? Asked June. Didn't they all just get out of prison? Tom tells her to take it easy.
Tom calms his little lady down, or tries to, but June now has a terrible feeling about this. Now? On the stroll, Joe asks Lake if he can trust his kid. Lake said that he didn't count on the girl being there, and Joe asks again, when is Lake going to tell them? Lake says he will. Stop asking already. Joe suggests just letting them go. They don't really need them around here, and Lake asks if Joe wants to give them 10 cents to go buy a newspaper, so they can read about the prison break, I guess.
Then Lake says that as long as they keep an eye on them, they won't hear about the prison break. Then Stearn calls Lake over to talk to him.
Back with June and Tom, they're about to try something radical. They get in their car.
Tom thinks they might look awfully stupid if they've been suspicious over nothing, but June says they'll never know unless they try. So they get into the car and start to drive off.
Back with Lake and Stearn, Lake says that the kid will do exactly as he says. But to prove him wrong, Tom is driving his car down the deserted town's main/only road. Stearn plants himself directly in front of the car after Tom pauses. He shouldn't have stopped.
Lake goes to the car and asks what's the matter. Tom explains that June forgot to bring her medication, not knowing they'd be out this long, and he's taking her to the doctor. Lake tells him that Bushman will be along any moment and to wait. Tom says he'll just drop her off and come right back. She's in pain and has to go to the doctor. Then Joe comes up from behind the driver's side, pulls Tom from the car at gunpoint. Put the gun away, hisses Lake.
Lake says he's sorry it has to be this way. June gets out of the car and Joe gets in to go park it elsewhere. Lake tries to talk to Tom alone, and June goes off unsupervised. Lake tells Tom that he wanted to tell Tom about what was going on, but June showing up made it a problem for him. He had to ask Tom, though, because he's the only one that Lake could trust.
Lake continues that Bushman's a vicious man and he was released from prison at the same time Lake was. And Bushman has a hidden fortune, nearly $400,000, hidden in this town. Tom says that this could get Lake another 10 years in prison. Not a chance, says Lake. Bushman wouldn't dare go to the police.
Someone stole my stolen money.
And another thing, Lake needs Tom to contact some people for him who think he's still in prison.
Lake tells him to be careful what he tells June because women don't always understand these things. And I guess that's why this stupid plot makes no sense to me. And we go back to Joe and Stearn, who are sitting on a porch and bantering a bit. The flies don't bother Stearn, but they sure are all over Joe.
Back at their safety bench, Tom has told June what's going on, and she wants to know how Tom can trust Lake. He hardly knows him any more than she does. Tom says his stepfather isn't a criminal, and he was wrongfully sent to prison, so this is the least he can do for him. What about the gun, asks June. Did you ask what they are going to do with it? Murder Bushman, she goes on to say.
Then some whimsical clarinet and sax music plays as Joe lumbers through town. He spies a sleeping Stearn, who's supposed to be the watchman, and shoots in the general direction of Stearns' chair. A shirtless Stearn falls off the porch and onto the dirt. He gets up hopping mad, and when Lake comes over, he is too. Joe says he was just practicing on Sleeping Beauty, target practice. Stearn warns Joe to never let him catch him without his gun, and then Lake tells Stearn to keep his eyes open.
And on the road. After that excitement, Tom and June return to their bench. I've got to get a hold of that gun, says Tom.
Joe goes to the porch of the saloon and starts banging out what could charitably be described as a tune. By someone who is not me, though.
Stearn seems really annoyed by this.
It's pretty out-of-tune piano. It's not hard to be annoyed.
Suddenly the piano playing stops, and 2 gunshots ring out. Joe is shooting at a rattlesnake. Then he throws his gun at it.
That'll stop it.
Lake runs over and tells Tom to pick up the gun. Are you kidding? Says Joe, and we see that the snake has wrapped itself around the gun. Tom runs up with a stick and warns them that it might still be alive. He whacks at the snake a couple of times and picks up the gun and shoots at the snake twice. Lake tears the gun from Tom's hand and gives it back to Joe.
Joe opens it and checks the chamber and snarls at Tom. Do you know what you've done? What chance do we have against Bushman now? There's only 1 bullet left in the chamber.
What'd you throw it for? Asked Lake. You didn't want me to waste all the bullets, did you? Says Joe. Tom says they can still sneak up on Bushman and don't have to risk killing him this way. Just then, June calls out that a car is coming. Lake orders everyone to pick up some sort of weapon, a stone or whatever, and hide.
And Tom is to take June somewhere out of the way.
Joe takes cover in a hole. Stearn picks up a stone and hides behind the piano. And Lake picks up Tom's stick and hides behind some boxes. Tom and June take cover as well, but are weaponless. Well, there's your answer, says June. They don't need a gun to kill him. They'll just beat him to death.
The car pulls in and parks, but it's not Bushman. It's a honeymooning couple who are exploring the husband's favorite ghost town, or one of them at least. The 2 of them banter for a while until she gets bored and they drive off, never knowing that they weren't there in that town alone. Stearn makes fun of the couple after they leave, and Tom vows to do something, but he doesn't really know what to do.
Lake and Joe have decided they need more bullets, and Joe says he knows where he can get some. Tom objects, but Lake tells him that Bushman will be coming with a gun, and the only thing that will stop him is a gun. We're not going to shoot him, he says. We're just going to stop him from shooting us.
Lake wants Joe and Tom to go buy some bullets. Although this is pre-Walmart, so I don't know where they're going to shop for bullets. Tom agrees to go with Joe, only if he can take June and drop her off at a hospital on the way.
Your wife isn't sick, says Lake as he angrily stomps off. Meanwhile, Joe has gone to the car and is taking off. Stop him, Stearn, shouts Lake, but this time Stearn is unsuccessful in stopping the car. Joe has driven to the next town, or the past town, and he's watching the local eye candy.
2 women from town stroll past and Joe eyes them hungrily. Then Joe pivots his head to see the sheriff. Gun at his side, and Joe eyes that hungrily as well.
As the sheriff gets into his car and drives off, Joe starts up Tom's fair lane and follows him. As they head around a corner, Joe passes the police car and speeds on ahead. The sheriff turns on his siren and pursues. Eventually, Joe pulls over.
The sheriff approaches Joe's car and asks for his driver's license. Joe says sure, but shows him his fist instead. The sheriff falls backwards, and Joe hops out of the car and the 2 fight. Joe grabs the sheriff's gun and shoots him twice. Then he kneels over the sheriff's prone body and fishes around his waist for some more ammo. However, there's another truck headed his way, so he takes what he can, hops in his car, and drives away.
The truck pulls up, and the occupants jump out to check on the fallen sheriff. He's still alive, so one of them waits while the other gets in his truck and presumably goes for help. Meanwhile, Joe turns the car around to head back to the ghost town, which takes a lot of maneuvering.
A lot of squeaky braking. We haven't even started talking about that yet.
And it's very noticeable because this car, as all the cars in this movie, have a very squeaky brake.
Nearly every time a car comes to a stop, we hear eek, eek, eek over and over again. I I kept a count. I'll let you know at the end of the movie how many times this happened.
And there's 4 or 5 stops in this little bit of maneuvering alone as he's turning around at a crossroads trying to figure out which way to go. Because it turns out Joe's lost. So with all this stop and go, the Ford Fairlane is starting to overheat. Joe stops at a farmhouse where a young girl, Karen, is getting the mail. As Joe drives by, he asks if he can get some water. Sure, she says. He grabs her watering can and pours it into the car. You can't go around without water, she says. Yeah, I noticed, says Joe. He says he's looking for a ghost town around 50 miles from there. She points him in the direction of Central City. Then he asks if there's anyone around here who can fix a car.
She recommends her dad, who runs a filling station in town. Joe repeats, is there anyone around here that can fix my car? Just me, and I can't fix cars, she says, and Joe's not amused. She hovers around him as he futzes under the hood. She says that he must be from the city because he looks so nervous, and that's how city people look. She's about to ask what he does that makes him so nervous, but that's answered when she sees the gun that Joe left out on the seat of the car. She clams up and starts to back towards the house. Joe asks what gives, and she says she's supposed to be watching Mrs. Reynolds' baby inside. Joe figures out what she saw and what she's doing and grabs her. They struggle, and she falls and loses one of her pumps.
Joe slaps Karen and tells her to shut up. Then he pulls her up and puts her in the car. As they pull out, Karen takes the scarf off of her head. She drops it in the street in front of the house as Joe drives her off.
I guess that and the shoe will prove that she didn't leave willingly. But as to where she went, who would be able to tell? Back in the ghost town, Stearn is irked at how long Joe's been gone. Lake says that they can only wait, but Stearn wants to go hunting for cars in the mountains. Maybe he'll bag himself a good one.
Says Lake. Meanwhile, Tom and June are discussing their dilemma. Tom thinks they can come up with a plan if they become more acquainted with their surroundings, so he wants to go explore beyond a hill over there, he says, pointing. But June has grown rather attached to the bench in front of the general store, so she tells him to go off without her. She'll be all right.
Stearn is ragging on Lake. He thought he was the brains of this outfit. Lake says that if he had brains, he'd have left Stearn in his cell. Now with nothing to do, Stearn comes over to harass June. He determines she's alone and asks to talk to her, but she doesn't want to talk to him. He takes this as poorly as you might expect. He snarls, "What, are you too good to talk to me?" And she does not answer honestly. Instead, she just tries to walk away.
But Stearn grabs her, and June calls out, "Tommy!" Tom runs back to confront Stearn. Though Stearn is a big guy,
muscular big,
Tom gives him a chop in the back, which causes Stearn to let out a high-pitched scream as he falls to the ground. Stearn gets back up, and Tom flips him over his shoulder. Once again, Stearn gets up and comes at Tom, but a chop to the face sends Stearn again to the ground and again screaming like a girl. Lake walks over to mock him. "You're a little rusty, Muscles."
And June comforts her husband, who won the battle. Now we catch up with Joe and his hostage. She seems to have nodded off in the car, although later we'll find out that he gave her a head injury, and that's why she's out. At any rate, she's leaning up against him. She wakes up and tries to get away from him. He squeals on the brakes and tells her that he can give her life or death, so she should wise up and do what he says. And having given that warning, he drives off.
Back in Central City, June and Tom are back on their bench. June has noticed that Stearn hasn't taken his eyes off Tom since Tom kicked the crap out of him. Tom's not concerned about that right now, though. He's trying to figure out how they can get out of the situation after Joe returns with their car. If he can't figure out a way out of this, they'll have to wait until the police eventually show up and try to explain that they're not with these guys. Tom takes a final drag on his cigarette, then throws it out. Then he goes over to talk to his stepfather.
Lake tells Tom that he's impressed with his skills. Tom says he learned that in the Marines. Tom asks what Lake stands to gain from this deal. Well, it's $100,000. Isn't that enough? Then Tom asks, yeah, but what do you have to lose? Meaning his freedom. Lake thinks that he's simplifying things. Tom reminds him that with Stearn and Joe out there, Lake is going to be in danger for the rest of his life. He'll either get a visit from the police after Joe and Stearn squeal on him, or he'll get blackmailed by them at some point in the future. But Lake has thought all that through, and they're just going to scare Bushman, not kill him. Don't you remember? Tom figures that it's likely if Joe returns, he'll shoot them all and take off with all the cash. Tom, I hate to tell you, buddy, but they all have the same plan. That's how these movies work.
Lake tells Tom he'll make a great lawyer, but he needs to be sure to get all the facts. Lake says that 10 years ago, he was offered an opportunity by a criminal and he took it. And now he's offered another opportunity for $100,000 to start over, and he'd be a fool not to take it. Then he drops the bombshell. 10 years ago, in that trial, he was guilty. Tom Tom is shocked. Guilty?
So now he can never practice law again, and he has nothing to lose in this deal. He tells Tom, "Thanks for trying, kid," and Tom walks away defeated.
Just then, Joe returns to the ghost town with Karen. The car squeaks to a halt. As he steps out from the car, a voice yells at him to drop the gun and turn around. Thinking it's Bushman, Joe complies.
Then Stearn drops off a second-story balcony and rushes over to Joe. At the same time, Lake goes up to him. Joe is trying to get the dropped gun, but Stearn tackles him. Lake picks it up.
Stearn asks where Joe put the bullets, but Joe says he doesn't have any more. Lake goes to Karen and asks where he picked her up. Karen says she wasn't picked up. He kidnapped her. "Kidnapped you," says Lake. Then Lake goes over to Joe, who's being patted down by Stearn. "I can't find any bullets on him," says Stearn. Lake asks where Joe put the bullets, and Joe moans he used them on the sheriff.
Lake looks at the girl, whose dress, for reasons known only to the director, is semi-see-through.
Tom and June have been watching the proceedings from their bench, and June decides that they should help the girl. She looks frightened, so they go over and drag her back to the bench, not saying a word to her until they get there.
Once there, they trade names and get her story. She's Karen Dunn, and she says she was forced into the car after seeing Joe's gun and knocked out when she tried to escape, but no one saw them leaving.
She goes on to say that she had been babysitting for Mrs. Reynolds, who was due back any minute, and that Karen lost her shoe in the driveway and left her scarf on the road in front of the house, and that road leads up here to Central City, so surely they'll be able to find her.
I assume it leads elsewhere. That's 50 miles of road. It's got to have more than one turnoff.
Tom tells her not to say anything else as Lake comes over. Lake asks if anyone saw her. Tom says no one saw anything, but they won't be able to stay much longer. "Just long enough for Bushman," says Lake as he strolls off.
This whole movie is waiting for Bushman. Karen exposits that Lake is the guy from the news.
When she saw the gun in the seat, she put two and two together and realized that Joe was one of the jailbreakers.
She doesn't know his first name or the names of the other two guys with them, but she does know that they escaped from prison.
Tom can't believe it. They escaped?
Tom demands Karen tell them everything that she knows. I think she just did. In the next scene, Stearn walks with intent towards Lake. He's convinced that the cops are now going to zero in on them because they have Karen with them. Lake poo-poos this, but says that Stearn can make a run for it over the mountains if he likes. Slowly, Joe's inert form starts to move and he gets up. He demands his gun, but of course Lake hangs on to it.
"What are you talking about? You needed a gun, didn't you? And I got it for you, didn't I?" "No more guns for you, Joe," says Lake. He doesn't see how one man can do all the stupid things Joe has done in one day. So Joe thinks of a stupid thing that was done today that wasn't Joe's fault. "Who decided to bring him?" he asks, pointing at Tom.
Lake goes back over to Tom. Tom tries to appeal to Lake's better nature by showing him Lake's old law book, one Tom has hung on to all these years. Tom says that this book belonged to a man with a future. Yeah, but that's not Lake anymore, Tom. At least not after the next 15 minutes happen. Anyway, Tom throws the book in the dirt and drops the news. He knows Lake is an escaped convict. Lake looks ashamed for the first time all movie.
Now Tom, June, and Karen are all sitting on the bench, watching Stearn march past. They see him report to Lake, then he walks back in the other direction. Then Tom and June walk over to the saloon. June heads toward the porch as Tom goes beside it to speak with Lake. Tom says that it looks like Bushman isn't coming. Suppose he found out about the prison break and decided not to come. And how did he break out anyway?
Lake cautions him to get back. Then we hear June calling for help. Tom and Lake go around the corner to see June seated on the porch of the building, and she looks like she's pretending to be hurt. Lake tells Tom to help his wife. Tom reaches for her, but she shrieks, "Snake!" And this is enough of a distraction for Tom to grab the gun.
Tom orders everyone to come over there. Stearn and Tom line up next to Lake, and June and Karen stand behind Tom. "What do you think you're going to do, Tom?" says Lake. "Take us back into town? The car will be a little crowded. I'd give you the keys if I thought it would help. Besides, there's only one bullet in that gun, and you know what will happen to you if you do."
Yep, if he shoots one of them, the remaining two are free to clobber him and do God knows what to the women. Lake assures Stearn and Joe that Tom isn't going to shoot and tells him to spread out. Tom, defeated, drops the gun. Stearn grabs it and tells Joe to bring the car around.
Then he tells Tom and Lake to take off their ties and for Lake to use them to tie them up. Over at the car, Joe grabs the bullets he had hidden under the floor mat. Then he drives the car back to the others. Stearn says they should have done this a long time ago, referring to tying up Tom. When Joe returns with the car, Tom and June and Karen are pushed into the back seat, and Stearn hands the gun to Joe. Then Stearn climbs behind the wheel and says, "So long, sucker," to Lake. They start to leave, but Lake tells them to wait. There's a car coming.
Finally.
It must be Bushman. "We've waited for him this long," shrugs Joe.
The car does a 3-point turn, brakes shrieking all the way, and Stearn takes it around back.
So they hide the car with Tom, June, and Karen still in the back seat. June and Karen are gagged, and Tom is punched out before Joe ducks out of sight.
When you say gagged, though, they just tie handkerchiefs under their noses. They're not gagged in any way. And then they take position outside as the car approaches. But the car just pulls through the ghost town and moves on.
So the jailbreakers follow him on foot. They take cover behind a big rock and see Bushman get out of his car. But he's too far away for them to do anything, so they go a little closer and take cover behind Bushman's car. And they watch as he begins digging for his loot.
Joe has his gun at the ready, but Lake tells Joe to wait until Bushman finds the money. Back at the car, Tom comes to. He asks Karen to untie him, and he says he's going to go warn Bushman to not start digging because then they won't shoot him. But it's too late. Bushman is digging.
Bushman continues digging as Tom comes near. From behind the car, Joe has his gun pointed at Bushman. "Don't miss," whispers Lake. Tom yells, "Bushman, watch out!" as Joe fires the gun.
Yeah, thanks to Tom's early warning, he was able to catch the bullet right in his head. Stearn rushes up to Bushman, who's dead on his feet, and takes his gun before he drops his inert form on the dirt. Stearn takes a shot in Tom's direction, but Lake says not to worry about them now. It's time to collect their fortune. They crouch around the hole and look, but there's no money, at first. Then the three of them start digging with their hands.
Tom returns to the car and tells the women that they killed Bushman in cold blood. He cuts the Fairlane's brake line, saying they won't get far on these mountain roads. Then he orders the women to hide, away from the car. Meanwhile, the jailbreakers have been successful and found the case. Stearn shoots it open. As they're admiring their treasure, they fail to see Tom putting Bushman's car in neutral and pushing it toward them. They look up and Stearn fires off a shot. Joe falls backwards just as the car rolls towards him. It bumps his leg and it moves perpendicular to his body in an odd fashion. But don't worry, he's okay.
Well, what's weird about this is that we see Joe, Stearn, and Lake all together on the side of the car. Tom pushes it, and then an instant later, Joe's in front of the car getting run over. And he only basically is saved by the fact that there's a big rock there next to where his leg is that actually helps stop the car.
Yeah, this movie is difficult to find, but we do recommend you go to our webpage and look at the trailer. We do have the trailer available, and that shot of him getting hit by the car is in the trailer, and it's kind of amusing to see.
Put it mildly. Stearn gets off a shot, and Tom is wounded as he runs away. Then Stearn fights with Lake, and though he can't shoot him, no bullets left, he knocks him down and steals the cash box. He runs to the car, jumps in, and backs off Joe's legs. Joe jumps up, and then Stearn drives off. As it passes him, Joe shoots the car in the gas tank, and it leaves behind a stream of gasoline in the dirt as it leaves.
Tom returns to town, holding his shoulder, and June runs up to meet him. Then we see Joe reloading his gun with the bullets he stashed. As Lake comes to and stumbles toward him. "Where'd you get the bullets?" he asked. Joe turns around and shoots him. "Didn't I tell you? From the sheriff." Then Joe runs off. Tom and June have taken refuge in a hollowed-out tree. June sees that Tom has been injured, and he assures her he's fine. Then they see Joe run out and take their car. "Where's Karen?" asks Tom. "She's all right," June assures him.
And we have to take her word for it.
Stearn wasn't able to get very far with his busted gas tank, so Joe catches up to him easily. Stearn sees him coming, so he grabs the stash from the car and starts to run up a hill. Joe jumps out of the car and shoots at him. Stearn drops the money and continues running. When Joe grabs the money, Stearn attempts to jump him, but Joe shoots him dead in the air.
He falls off a giant boulder.
Then Joe returns to the Fairlane with the money.
Joe is free now, he and his money box cruising down twisty, turny roads with hairpin turns. Then Joe gets the bright idea to fondle his ill-gotten cash. Naturally, in the convertible, the wind starts to pick up some bills. Joe tries to retrieve his money, but soon realizes he has bigger problems when he tries to slow down and the brakes don't work.
Apparently, the steering doesn't work either because he careens off the side of the mountain because crime doesn't pay.
Back at the ranch, Tom picks up the law Bible that he had dropped in the dirt and flips through it. He grimaces to himself and then joins June and Karen, who I guess really was safe, to start the 50-mile trek back to anywhere else. And that's the end.
You're listening to the American International Podcast, and we're discussing the Jailbreakers from 1960.
Not a lot is known about the production of the Jailbreakers, and believe me, I did try to find something. One thing I found was an online blog detailing the history of the Iverson Movie Ranch, where the ghost town scenes were filmed. The person running the blog examined the state of the buildings in some scenes from the Jailbreakers, and by comparing it to other movies shot there, determined that Jailbreakers must have been filmed about 1955 or 1956, but we don't have another source we can use to verify that claim. We do know from IMDb that some other scenes were shot in Richmond, Virginia.
1959 and 1960 were eventful years for Mary Castle, who played June, and not in a good way. Castle, known for her resemblance to Rita Hayworth, was found drunk on a beach wearing only her underwear in September of 1959. 2 weeks later, she was arrested for another episode of public intoxication and tried to hang herself in her cell. She was revived, released on bail, and ended up paying a fine.
Castle filed for bankruptcy in 1960 and a few months later was arrested for yet another bout of public drunkenness. Less than a week after her release, she pled guilty to charges of failing to appear in court on a traffic violation from 2 years earlier and was ordered to pay a $50 fine.
Robert Hutton, who played Tom, was born in 1920, 1 year earlier than Michael O'Connell, who played his stepfather, Lake,
but did look a good bit older than him. This was the first film for writer, director, producer Alex Grasshoff, who was 27 at the time he made The Jailbreakers. He would later go on to direct television and documentaries, and he won the Academy Award for Best Documentary Feature in 1968 for Young Americans. But it was revoked after the Academy discovered that the film had been shown first in 1967, thus making it ineligible for an Oscar in 1968. This is the only time in the Academy's history that an Oscar has been revoked.
Gabe Delutri's big break was in a segment of the Playhouse 90 television show, after which Grasshoff let him audition for the role of Joe.
That's according to the AIP press book. Coleman Francis played the sheriff who was gunned down by Joe. He would later go on to infamy as the director of terrible films like The Skydivers, Beast of Yucca Flats, and Red Zone Cuba, all skewered on Mystery Science Theater 3000, and with good reason.
An article in the May 12, 1959 issue of the Los Angeles Mirror announced that American International had purchased the recently completed movie The Jailbreakers. The Mirror's article credited Theodore Tickton as the producer.
So, since that wasn't true, maybe it wasn't recently completed either. The Jailbreakers was released in the U.S. on a double bill with Why Must I Die in June of 1960. In some areas, though, it was paired with The Road Racers and in others with Circus of Horrors. When it reached New York City in January of 1961, it shared billing with Goliath and the Dragon.
Taglines for The Jailbreakers include 4 desperate men on a $400,000 trail of terror.
$400,000 and 4 desperate men in a race against time, vengeance, and violence.
Roy Litherland of the Bolton News, a British paper, published his review of The Jailbreakers in March of 1960 when it was paired with Road Racers at a Manchester trade show. He called both films a complete waste of time. Both are American and both look as though they have cost about 3 pence each to make. No studio sets are used, and with the exception of a couple of names, Castle and Hutton, the actors and actresses are unknown. Of the 2 films, Litherland found Road Racers to be the poorer, cautioning the whole thing is such a mix-up mess that it's best forgotten.
Newsday's review in brief called The Jailbreakers an extremely mediocre treatment of that old chestnut about some criminals who threaten a nice young couple.
Howard Thompson of the New York Times reviewed The Jailbreakers and Goliath and the Dragon when both opened there in 1961. He wrote, "The word for The Jailbreakers is pitiful, calling the double feature rock-bottom absurdity. American International Pictures is the sponsor of this completely junky program that totals more than 2.5 hours of mighty hard sitting." He concludes that The Jailbreakers was a feeble, static, and trumped-up clinker.
And that's the extent of what I could find out about The Jailbreakers online. I'm sure there's more out there, and people are welcome to contribute their information if they know something we don't, but that was how much I could find.
So, Cheryl, as I mentioned, The Jailbreakers is a very difficult movie to find, and apparently it wasn't very popular upon its initial release, which means that we have to talk about it ourselves.
We always talk about our movies ourselves. If they're popular, if they're not, it really comes down to how we feel about a movie, because this is our podcast.
But in this case, our opinions hold more weight because there isn't anybody to speak against us.
Not living, anyway. It's hard to say what I feel about this movie because it's so slight. It's basically an episode of a TV show. It's 64 minutes long. It's almost like a TV show bottle episode because everything happens in the same place and there's hardly any movement beyond that. There is, but it's just brief.
I love the fact that Tom and June just hang out on that bench most of the movie.
It makes the movie very static, not just them, but the whole cast being stuck in this one location. It's a very small cast. I think of the people that we named, there was nobody else that even had a speaking part.
The cars are my favorite characters.
The brakes, you mean? The squealy brakes.
Yeah, they say, "Eee," and that's it. But
yeah, like I said, I counted. There were 28 brake squeals in 64 minutes. And that's like one every other minute, just about. That's a lot. Especially since they were not driving for most of the movie.
This movie is set up almost like a play, or it could be a play.
Yeah.
Just because there's not a lot of movement and not a lot of location, and Tom and June sit on the bench most of the time. You think they'd be the ones waiting for Bushman. Speaking of waiting for Bushman, which would have been a much better title for this movie, it almost seemed like he was never going to show up. I got the impression when I first watched it that this was just an exercise in futility and they'd just end up killing each other, trying to find the loot themselves. Maybe one of them would find it and then everybody would be killed. Yeah, I did too. And then Tom and June could drive off and, I guess, regret their decisions at their leisure. Yeah, I too was surprised when Bushman actually showed up. And he's only in the movie for the last, 4 minutes or so? And he doesn't have any lines, but he gets a credit, whereas the guy who played Georgie was the half of that married couple that just showed up in town. Them. He and his wife did not get a credit. We have no idea who these kids were. Nope. I couldn't find that out. And he talks a lot. They both do. Yeah, she's blathering on about how she wants to get frisky and he just wants to look at ghost towns. And then when they drive away, we see that they're just married. And I don't predict good things for that marriage. And I just, like I said, at one point, women don't understand these things. Like, this plot is so stupid. Their idea was so dumb. They had to have known that only one of them was going to get out of there alive, if even that. They've obviously never watched a movie. No, I mean, Treasure of the Sierra Madre. No, what always happens is they turn on each other. They have nothing in common except. Why did Lake even need to get the other guys out? That doesn't make sense to me. They weren't helping him. I guess they could have helped fight Bushman. Maybe that's the point, because he couldn't take out Bushman by himself. He's kind of a little guy. But if his goal was just to shoot him once he dug up the treasure, he probably could have done that on his own. For the sake of the movie, let's assume that Joe was the one with the most underground ties, and he was the one who set up the driver who gave them the gun. That could be. Because they needed a gun to get this thing off the ground. So let's just say that's a possibility. Like we said, it's pre-Walmart, so you can't just go up to a store and buy a gun. And not that I gave that any thought. This just occurred to me right now as we were discussing it. I mean, most movies just expect you to take the plot as it happens and not really consider, is this feasible? Is this plausible? But when we take 4 hours to watch one 1 hour movie, we can't think of anything else. I think it's odd that this place is called Central City, because you'd think a place called Central City would be more central to the area and not be a ghost town. 50 miles from everything? Well, obviously somebody painted that sign in the prop department and hung it up. So it's not really Central City. Well, Karen calls it Central City when she directs Joe there. I know. That's so it is. But the movie called it that. Yeah, it's a poor decision is what I'm saying. Oh, yeah. They could have called it Iverson or something. Iverson Ranch. It's hard to believe, but a lot of movies were shot there after this, including an Elvis movie. I think it was Harem Scarum. I thought it was odd toward the end when Karen just disappears, but she's safe. Maybe she had to go to the bathroom. I don't know. They just did this scene, and I guess they didn't call her in, or she had already been dismissed from the shoot, and they had one more scene to shoot. So they just acknowledged, oh, she's around here somewhere. She's fine. And then she does show up at the end. I was kind of surprised to see her come back at the end. I just thought that she'd be gone for the rest of the film. I'm sure they shot that out of order, and well, obviously. They had to add that scene with Tom and June. I'm going to go back to the car squeaking. Every single car in this film, including that truck that stops when the sheriff gets shot. Yeah. It squeals with the exact same sound. So initially I just noticed it on the Fairlane. I thought that they were just shooting sound live and the brakes were squeaking, but every single vehicle stops the same way. So they actually added all those squeaks in post. That's a directorial choice for sure. Like, we won't know a car stops unless we hear that. Eee! And I'll never know again. Even when you're driving. Unless my brakes squeak, I'm going to assume I'm still moving. So there's a lot of silliness to this movie. Like the fight scene? Like the fight scene. It's badly staged. I think that Stearn would put up at least a little bit more of a fight, but Tom just karate chopped him. Like, it didn't even look like a real kung fu style karate chop. Well, they cut away every time he hits, so you don't actually see that. You see him coming at him, and then you see Stearn falling on the ground going, ah!
Well, there is the one scene where you see the hand come right at the camera, and that gets him in the head, I guess, and that's what takes him out for good. And that was really weirdly staged.
And he screams in that part, too, which is which is just hilarious.
He's not that tough.
He's a big guy. I don't think he's terribly tall, but he's got some muscles on him. He's built.
Yeah, Tom is tall. Tom is very tall. And as he said, he was in the military, so that counts for something. But Tom is really dumb. Why did he take his wife on this little jaunt? I mean, we're talking about somebody who'd been in prison, who he doesn't really know very well, and he's doing some kind of strange favor for.
I think he was under the impression he was just going to buy him a meal and be done with it, drop him off somewhere. I don't think he knew what he was in for.
But at that point, when they're starting to drive into the mountains, he should have thought twice and said, you know what? Let's leave June at the diner and not take my new wife out, especially with these two other guys in the car. At that point, he should have been like, no, this is not on the up and up. There's two other guys. They both look pretty unsavory. There's no reason to put your wife in the car with these men.
Well, he probably hadn't noticed that Joe was carrying a gun yet. He does notice at some point.
It's still basically three strange men.
At least one who's gotten out of prison. You know this.
Right. At least one. At least one's an ex-con. So you have to assume that there's some sort of negative association with the other two. And you're driving off to God knows where no one can help you.
And he's a lawyer, so he should be more careful about these things.
Well, he's studying law. I don't think he's passed the bar yet. And I don't know that he ever will.
Probably not.
But they get away basically scot-free, aside from the fact that they're stranded in Central City, which is 50 miles from anywhere, and they have to walk back.
Yeah, he did take a bullet to the shoulder.
Yeah, that's right. So is he going to be okay? That's a long way to go with an open wound. I don't know. This movie just has a lot of plot holes, and in a movie this short, it shouldn't have that many.
Yeah, I'm wondering how long it would take for the brake line being cut to affect the car, because Joe had no trouble stopping when he stopped behind Stearn.
Right.
It wasn't until he was bound those mountainous roads. See, I don't know anything about cars, so I don't know if that would have been an issue or not, but I would think he would have crashed into Bushman's car instead of stopping.
Pretty bloodthirsty of Tom to do that to the car, too, knowing that somebody was probably going to be killed. At least there's a good chance that this would kill somebody. But I guess at that point, he didn't care. He'd been stranded there all day with no food, no water.
Yeah, and he hadn't even been shot yet.
No, and then someone tried to assault his wife, as anyone could have told him would happen. I don't know. This movie requires Tom to be very dumb, and that's always a bad sign in a movie. And your hero has to be an idiot for the plot to work. It's just not good.
I didn't really feel there was a hero in this movie.
Well, you didn't see me, but I was like, in my mind, air quoting hero. He's not a hero. He's an idiot. And he brings a lot of this on himself. Why didn't they have the radio on when they were going to pick him up? They could have heard about the jailbreak then. That would have been a good thing to know. And even when he finds out, he can't believe it.
I do think he married up. I think June has a better head on her shoulders than Tom does.
Yeah, I think if she had known what this whole thing was about to entail, she would have just taken his keys away from him.
She's not very observant. She really didn't know what was going on. She knew something was wrong because she has that women's intuition. But from what she observed, she wasn't able to figure anything out. Because Tom still had to explain things to her all the time.
Well, once she heard about the jailbreak,
when she had the information, she could deduce it. But she needed that information presented to her. She couldn't tell it just by seeing it for herself.
No, because she kept telling Tom that this isn't right. Something's wrong.
That's the intuition.
Yeah. But she didn't know anything about. All she knew is she's supposed to do something with this guy's stepdad. She didn't know anything about the other guys that were coming along. And at that point,
she didn't notice the gun in Joe's back pocket.
Maybe she didn't want to look at his butt.
Well, Tom did.
Well, that's Tom's deal. I don't know. I'm just explaining that even though there's much to amuse in this movie, there's, as quality-wise, you just can't grant it anything. I can't approve of it quality-wise. It's weird how that there's really not a lot of information about this movie. I've never encountered such a wall of nothing when I did research before.
I don't think it's that odd for a couple of reasons. One, it was independently produced and a pickup by AIP. And two, this movie is really difficult to find. I don't believe it has ever had a home video release at all. The copy that we found, somebody recorded off AMC way back in the day, and that's circulating if you know where to look. But you can't find this movie easily.
Is it on YouTube?
No.
Wow. So it's nowhere.
It's somewhere. You just got to know where to look. So probably most people who are listening to this have never seen this film.
One thing I did not mention is that the Showtime Rebel Highway series, who did 10 remakes, well, sort of remakes of AIP movies, did one for Jailbreakers. And they obviously didn't go by the plot. Most of them didn't. But for some reason, they picked out this movie as one to emulate when they selected 10 movies to do. So why they picked this movie? I think it was probably just the title.
I'm sure it was just the title, which means that Jailbreakers must still be owned by whoever owns all the Arkoff films, even though it's never had a home video release, which I believe is with Lionsgate domestically right now. I guess it was 30 titles or so that he kept from Filmways. He kept for himself, and there was all this old stuff.
Oh, so that was one of the, you think that was one of the?
It must be.
Oh, okay.
And then Susan Hart got a handful of those, and we've talked about those before.
Mm-hmm.
So that's interesting that this one never saw at least a VHS release from RCA Columbia back when they were releasing all these films.
I can see why, though.
Well, I can see why they didn't, but It's interesting that this seems to be the only one that was never released.
Yeah.
They were releasing them at a higher price point. They were like $29.99.
Oh, wow.
For like I Was a Teenage Werewolf and Teenage Frankenstein. And those sold moderately well, but not well enough. So the rest they threw out at like $9.99 price points on the extended play mode. That's when we got The Amazing Colossal Man and Rock All Night. So I'm surprised that Jailbreakers just wasn't included in that batch.
Right. At least, I mean, it is double feature material. It's short. It pads out another short film to make it kind of worth your while to go see.
And this particular film was paired with Why Must I Die, which we talked about a few weeks ago. And I think that would have been a great double feature because the first one is so dramatic and this one is just so over the top bizarre. I think, but they're both dealing with crime. So I think it would be a great double feature.
And crime not paying. Why Must I Die was in June, it was with Road Racers. And by July, it had been paired with Why Must I Die in a lot of markets. So it basically just depended on when and where you saw it. Like I said, Circus of Horror also was a co-feature, and Goliath and the Dragon, too.
That's a weird double feature.
That's a very strange double feature. That doesn't track at all. They must have just picked it for how long it is. We need a short movie to go after this long movie. But if they hadn't done that, I wouldn't have that one review of the 3 I could find. What's funny is doing Jailbreakers as a search through a newspaper archive means you get a lot of stories about people breaking out of jail, which apparently was a huge problem in 1960 because there were hundreds of articles about people busting out of prison. I guess that's why we have the security that we do now.
And that's why this film was so timely.
Yep, ripped from today's headlines, no doubt.
So Cheryl, are you ready to rate the Jailbreakers using our AIP scale where A is awesome, I is intermediate, and P is pathetic?
I can rate it. I'm going to give it an I. Just because, well, it's mediocre. I don't think it's terrible. It's short. It doesn't take a lot of effort to watch this. There are highlights, the squeaky breaks, the silly fighting, the melodrama, but there are a lot of lowlights too. It just wasn't thrilling. It was too static, too much standing around talking. So I'm just going to put it square in the middle of our rating scale and give it an I. What do you think?
Well, the squeaking car was the first thing that I noticed, and I thought, this is an interesting choice. And then when that fight scene happened and Stearn let out his high-pitched scream, the movie totally won me over.
I could see that when we were watching it.
Nothing else mattered after that point.
Well, you don't think this is a good movie, though.
I think this is an awesome movie. It's not a great movie, but I think it's fun. And you're right, it is static, and it could be better. It should be better, but I did not mind that Tom and June spent most of their time sitting on a bench discussing how this kind of sucks that they are spending their Sunday in a ghost town with these guys running around waiting for somebody who may not show up.
That they're going to kill. They're definitely going to kill.
The big surprise, I think, is when Bushman actually did show up.
Briefly, yeah. I thought this was a waiting for Godot kind of situation.
Yeah, I did too. But I love this movie. I will watch this again and again. I'm going to give it an A.
I knew you were going to say that. I just can't echo the sentiment. I'm sorry.
Well, this movie, I had high hopes, but low expectations. And I think it met my hopes and exceeded my expectations. So I have to give it an A.
I can see where you're coming from. I had no expectations and basically got no reward for them either. Just the parts that you mentioned were silly and fun, but they're so few and far between in this otherwise pretty dreary movie. I think the ending was pretty good too. You should have mentioned that, where he's playing with his money for some idiotic reason and in a convertible, loose bills in a convertible as you're driving downhill.
The top was broken. He couldn't do anything about that.
Well, you can leave the box of money shut till you get somewhere. You could do that. And just seeing it sort of fluttering behind him. And then he just kind of decides not to drive anymore and goes straight off a cliff. And then, of course, the car crashes down. That was a fit ending to the movie. I do give it points for that, but still I can't up my grade any. Agree to disagree. And if you would like to agree or disagree, join us on our website, aippod.com. There you can find a contact form and talk to us. You can see trailers, look at movie paraphernalia like posters and lobby cards, and find out more about the films that we discuss. You can also find every episode that we've recorded thus far and bookmark it and find the episodes that we record from here on out, including this one.
Now it's time for us to bust down to the studio after this episode of the American International Podcast. I'm Jeff Markin.
And I'm Cheryl Lightfoot.
And we'll meet you at the drive-in. Follow the American International Podcast on Instagram and Letterboxd at AIP_pod and on Facebook at facebook.com/American International Podcast.
The American International Podcast is produced and edited by Jeff Markin.
A man whose mind is distorted by hatred.
And Cheryl Lightfoot.
A girl hungry for too many things.
The American International Podcast is part of the Pop Culture Entertainment Network.